how do you actually perceive the use of hyperganic in the design of consumer goods such as footwear? And how does it relate to things that you're exploring on your own?
You have all these different tools and you use different tools at different parts of the process. And so if there's an opportunity to take an old process and bring in better efficiencies and go through more ideas, you can validate more things, you can test better, and you can present something that's more, I think, validated.
Have a really, really special guest with us today in our office hours, and it's someone with whom we've partnered multiple times in our startup career, and he deals with consumer goods. And in fact, it's a very exciting pillar of consumer goods is footwear. And that's that's of course uh, none other than Daniel Shirley or from Hack Lab. Yeah. So Daniel, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself? How do you get into footwear design, and what's your philosophy behind it?
Yeah. Yep. My name's Daniel. When I was a kid, I was always kind of interested in art stuff, and through a not so direct route, my brother helped me find industrial design. So I ended up studying industrial design in uni,
Mhm.
and was more interested in the soft goods area of industrial design, so like bags and footwear. When I was in school, I ended up starting a backpack company with a friend, learned a ton that way, and then I got recruited to go get a real job and do sock design at a big sportswear company.
Mhm.
And I really wanted to do footwear, so I worked on kind of my own time and building up my experience and portfolio, and doing stretch assignments at work to break into footwear finally. So I've been officially a footwear designer for the last 3.5 years. Um, and then just been doing my own projects as well on the side. So I have a full-time job as a footwear designer, and then I do experiments on my own. I like to center my design approach in creating something that is new, better, or different. Just doing the same of what has been done doesn't really add value, especially when you're creating waste. It's like we already have enough of that, so make something different, trying to blend the familiar with unexpected and bring those together to create something interesting and um, delightful. I get inspired by nature a lot because I spend a lot of time outside, and then trying to understand um, the user and what they care about and what their needs are. So I'm trying to bring all those things together into something fresh, interesting.
Yeah, that's perfect. So previously we've had quite a bit of collaborations between you and Hyperganic. Like, how do you actually perceive the use of Hyperganic in the design of consumer goods such as footwear? And how does it relate to things that you're exploring on your own?
My understanding of the intent of Hyperganic is to kind of question the status quo of how things have been done and bring in algorithmic learning to shake up, expedite, and reimagine processes, right? So it's like the footwear industry has been the same for 100+ years. Like, yes, we have better foams, we have better technologies, we can do knit stuff, but like in the end, you're still basically building a shoe in the same way that it's been done for forever. You just use digital tools instead of manual tools for like creating tech packs, things that get sent to the factory that they build the files from. Um, and so I think as we move forward in the industry and also in the world, there's opportunities for how we do things because you have all these different tools
Yeah.
and you use different tools at different parts of the process. And so if there's an opportunity to take an old process and bring in better efficiencies. If you're a designer, you're still going to spend time designing, right? Like that
Yeah.
design process doesn't
Right.
magically become like one day instead of
Yeah.
weeks, but you
Yeah.
can go through more ideas, you can validate more things, you can test better, and you can present something that's more, I think, validated by using new tools. So yeah, for me with Hyperganic, it unlocked some some things for me in terms of like surfacing, bringing in that like finishing level on a 3D, where I could actually then take that 3D and do something with it, whether it print it myself or perhaps send it to factory. But yeah.
Got it. Got it. So, if I hear you correctly, it's really about experimenting with new tools because the industry hasn't changed in its approach for the past 100 years, even though technology has improved. So, did you bring this mentality to your work at maybe your full-time work at Puma? Because your latest public work is on the Puma Future Ultimate, and you even had Neymar wear it for a product commercial shoot. How does it feel, number one, to have Neymar wear your design? And number two, do you actually bring it bring this philosophy into your work at Puma?
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting because that was the very first thing that I worked on when I joined. And I'm now working on the third iteration of it. It'll be the eighth generation of the boot, but it's the third one that I worked on. And I think every time you work on something, you have an opportunity to, again, like ask questions of like, well, why have we done this in the past? And is there a better way? And then also build on the DNA, the trusted, like if someone loves this boot, you don't want to make it completely different in the next generation where they're like, I don't recognize it anymore, right? But that freshness. So it's a really fun challenge for me in terms of like, okay, this is how we did it last year, and now we're doing it this year, and then we're doing it again. How do you question the process, and how do you get to a better result? And I think, you know, I can look back on my experience on the three versions of it and say like this one is better than in the past, at least from
I see.
like a
I
process
see.
standpoint. When I was a kid, I paid attention to what shoes athletes were wearing. That was kind of like why I was interested in shoes. I liked sports a lot.
Yep.
Um, and so to see something you've worked on these players, um, it's really cool in some ways. It almost doesn't feel real,
Mhm.
where it's like, oh no, wait, like that is real. That is actually happening. And when you're part of sport, um, the product that you work on can become part of these iconic moments, like highlight reels of like, okay, here was this like game-winning penalty, or here was this like incredible um, move or finish or whatever, and you start to be a part of that. But honestly, one of the coolest things has been seeing kids' reactions
Oh, wow.
to product. We go and talk to kids and try and understand like what they care about and what they need, and you know, these kids that are spending their own money on shoes. These are, you know, serious or semi-serious teenage footballers, and showing them a product that hasn't come out yet to get their feedback,
Mhm.
and seeing them get like super excited about it and being like, oh, like, you know, you're creating this emotional experience for kids tied to the sport. That's really fun. So
I see.
seeing the pros wear it and then seeing the kids react to it, it kind of like comes together.
Gotcha. And you are the one at the center of everything, curating this experience, curating the product, and there's different layers as well. So it speaks to us really because Hyperganic, when we design things, even for the industrial sector, one of our iconic signature is human touch together with something that looks unbelievably real, but it's 3D printed and it is indeed real. So creating that
Mm.
emotional connection and that iconic feel to it is what we strive for in our branding. And that is actually a trope from consumer product that we brought into it.
Yeah.
Um, I also remember, like you mentioned, you talk to kids. Well, when I was playing basketball, one of the most My favorite shoe was the Nike Zoom Kobe 3 with a high cut, and it's amazing. It looks so good. RIP Kobe Bryant. But when they move on to the Nike Zoom Kobe 4, yeah, the design kind of lost on me. So
Yeah.
but I suppose, behind the scenes, the designers, they did improve the design iteration processes, but, might not actually achieve similar um, cult status for the product that
Yeah.
they keep pushing
Yeah.
through. Yeah. So are you concerned with this? Maybe the next iteration will not receive so much or fanfare?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the pursuit of creating better experiences, you also run the risk of failing, right? Um, I think the boot out right now is 2023. I think that 2024 is a more is a better experience and it's more beautiful.
Uh,
So I think it will be good. 25 is still kind of this nebulous thing that we're defining. So we'll see, but also very excited about that. But I mean, in the end, like you don't have control over how someone's going to react to something. And I mean, it's kind of an interesting point because companies that are working 24 months or 18 months ahead of when the product comes out,
mhm,
you're taking a lot of risk, right? You don't know necessarily how the product is going to be received, but you're
mhm,
investing millions of dollars, euros
mhm.
into this product
Yep.
um, that will hopefully sell, right?
Yep.
And so when you look at the system and you start looking at things like algorithmic engineering and 3D printing,
Mhm,
where you can actually validate the idea much faster
mhm.
or with less upfront um, investment. I think that's one of the areas that's interesting to me within footwear is like I make a concept and I put it on my Instagram and someone's like, "Hey, it's really cool. You should make it." And I'm like,
Yep.
I don't have $1 million to just make this shoe because one person on Instagram told me I should, right?
Yep.
Um, and you can do like the crowdfunding thing where you get pre-orders and then you're still putting up a ton of money and there's still a lot of risk, but you at least have some initial, um, investment or community around it.
Yep.
Um, but for example, with a 3D printed shoe where you only produce it once it's been ordered,
Yep.
you've removed all these barriers that keep an independent idea from making it to the market or even a more progressive idea. Because brands have to be,
Yep.
they have to hedge their bets, right? Because they're investing all this money and stuff.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So, that is a good segue to, our collaboration on the AE1. Who came up with the name, by the way?
That was Marcus,
I see. Okay.
because algorithmic engineering AE, right?
Mm,
And then this being the first collaboration, so it was number one.
I see.
Originally it was going to be like AE concept, but
Mhm.
with the word concept, it can sometimes elicit this idea of unfinished.
I
But it's
see.
like no, like this is a
The shoe.
functional part, right? Like you
Gotcha.
can use it.
Gotcha.
And so we pulled the concept
Mhm.
out of the name to reinforce the idea that it's done, it's polished, it's ready to go.
Gotcha. Yeah, because it also feels like it's the predecessor of the F Force one because E comes before F.
Yeah.
So
No, no,
that's a
no,
nice
no
touch.
affiliation. Please don't
Gotcha.
sue us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We declare no affiliation with Nike. Yes. Yeah. So the concept behind that is actually when we met Desma, who wants to also, sort of disrupt the process of traditional manufacturing, just like how you described it. It takes months of pre-planning and capital to actually bring something to market. We thought of like just democratizing this process together with Desma, powered by algorithmic engineering, where
Mm.
designers go from 2D profile sketches and lines to direct millable um, mode, and then immediately you could just go to market with that. Of course, you have to do different mode sizes and everything depends on your demand, but that cuts short the process. And I'm just wondering, like, how do you think of this as an idea when you first heard of it? And then second, how do you actually make it accessible to your community?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the areas of disruption in the process is that you often working with a factory, you create a 2D schematic,
Hmm.
send it to the factory. They send you a 3D file, you print it, you
Hmm.
look at it, then you go back to 2D to make revisions on it.
So,
Then it's this back and forth between 2D and 3D, right? And so that lengthens the process, and there's also a lot of room for misinterpretation where it's like, oh, like the factory updated this, but they misunderstood what I meant when I said this, and that didn't they did it differently than I intended, right?
is that a
Communication.
commonplace? Is that commonplace in the industry?
Yeah.
So 2D to 3D.
Yeah.
I see.
At least in my experience, I believe it's the kind of the standard. And when it I mean, you can add in language barriers, you can add in time zone differences, right? Where you're working with partner overseas. And so in your toolbox, it's like, how do you actually make communication clearer? So the thing that you give to the factory and the thing you get back to the factory are
Mhm.
closer.
Gotcha.
And so something like this design to mold process is like your input is the output.
Gotcha.
You've in theory chopped out all this back and forth. And so something that could take 6 months or
Mhm.
4 months has now gone down to a week. And there may be, some things that need to tweak or like, hey, like your
Mhm.
drawing's cool, but there's not enough volume underneath the heel. So you need to adjust it, right? Or the flow rate of the foam, can we, fix these things? But like, so for me, I think it's super interesting in that, like, how do you take an old process and disrupt it? One of the reasons that companies build things 2 years out is because of all that time it takes to develop and then all that time it takes to sell in
Mhm.
to all the different stores and accounts and things, and then to produce it and get it to stores. That takes time, right?
Gotcha.
So if you can accelerate parts of that process, you're starting to reduce the amount of time it takes to go from an idea to market. And so I think it was interesting for me to try and sell the product. Desma created a limited run of pieces, and then they gave me free reign to kind of, sell it. And so I just posted, I think, a story and some posts that said like, hey, if you're this, if you're size 44 and you want a chance to purchase this, join the raffle. So, you got a bunch of people join the raffle and then you randomly picked. Yeah, it was cool to kind of have the experience again. I did it with backpacks where you're printing shipping labels and you're mailing it off to somewhere. And I think people really enjoyed seeing the kind of behind the scenes. Because it's one thing to look at something and be like, oh yeah, it's cool. But to see like how the mold was made, how the part gets made, how you inject, because this is direct injection. So you're taking a lasted upper on a foot
Mhm.
form and you're injecting the foam straight into it instead of gluing later. Again, that's another thing where Desma is trying to push and disrupt the way things have been done, where normally you create a bottom and you create a top and then you glue them together. That's how shoes have been done for a long time, or you stitch them together. But with this direct injection, you're cutting down a ton of time and a ton of processes.
That's amazing. I see a lot of shoes starting to, what we call it in Singapore, crocodile a bit. With traditional methods, even
Yeah.
after 2-3 months of storage, you didn't store them properly and they start to mold and things like that happen. So in fact, yesterday when I was wearing the AE1, we have two pairs in our office. Number one
Nice.
is fit. I wonder what size you typically design in because it fits my my feet exactly as they are. But I
Yeah.
realized that the 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 molded part actually blends with the upper.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seal is like excellent. Could you tell us a bit more about the design concept of the AE1?
One of the things that I kind of experienced using some of Hyperganic's product was this ability to create um, kind of intricate surfaces with fairly simple inputs within very intricate surfaces. I had used it on one of my concepts, my PYR concept, and shared it on my Instagram, didn't whatever, and that ended up being, I don't know, not going viral, but it was my most engaged with post ever. And I wondered if it was if people were responding to some of that texturing, that kind of um, so I felt like it was the right thing to bring into the AE1. Was like, hey, we'd like to partner with you to test out this, this beta process that we're working on.
Mhm.
And so it's capturing kind of like the movement of water, and have creating this surface that feels like it's moving. If you're using a traditional process of drawing a schematic and then sending it to the factory,
Mhm.
it's almost impossible to get that level of variation and consistency done by the factory unless they're like using Grasshopper or something algorithmic to
I see.
create the part, right? It's
Mhm.
doing all these height maps and section drawings where you're showing the surface. It would be incredibly tedious to communicate to a factory. But in this
Mhm.
situation, didn't need to. You just were able to take that intricate surface, um, and create the mold, create the part
Gotcha.
directly. Um,
Which tool do you use to create the heat map or height map?
I used Illustrator. I think it might have the appearance of maybe being algorithmic, but it was just
Mhm.
by hand and by brain.
Mhm.
There are faster ways, better ways to do it, but that's the way that I worked to have some control over it and whatnot. And so it's a tool that I'm fluent in. So again, it's like you have all these tools. When do you use them? Where do you use them?
Yep.
And for me, Illustrator has been a good way for me to create these kind of displacement maps that I work with.
Gotcha.
And so push one and pull the other, and then you've got this beautiful um,
Nice.
surface.
Nice. So, I mean, speaking of tools, like I've actually seen a lot of your 3D renderings, and uh, seems like you drew them in VR. Is it like what's the tool called?
So I've been using Gravity Sketch, is the app, and then you just using like a Quest headset.
Mhm.
Um, was Oculus, I guess it's Meta now, but yeah.
Yeah, MetaQuest. Yeah, true. So, like, is that actually really out of the norm, or do you see it being implemented in an industry where Gravity Sketch is used to create something like the future Ultimate?
Yeah, so I've used Gravity Sketch in my work at Puma, and sometimes it's just like to communicate a detail with my engineer, where she's going in and she's updating 3D for these different bottoms that we're doing. Because when you create a boot, there's a firm ground, there's a soft ground, there's a turf, there's indoor, there's all these different bottoms for your playing surfaces. And so we develop a bunch of bottoms for the shoes. But I think Gravity Sketch's intent is like, how do you shake up this antiquated process, right? Um, and how do you ideate quickly in a form that is closer to the end part, the end goal? So for me, I got into Gravity Sketch because my 3D skills were like okay, but like I didn't have $10,000 a year to pay for SolidWorks or whatever it was, right? Like didn't have that. And especially some of these 3D programs, it's almost like you have to have the design already figured out, and
Yeah,
then you're just trying to build it in 3D. Gravity Sketch works with these control points, and you're drawing in space, and it's a bit more free. And so once I got familiar with it, it unlocked this tool that I didn't have before, where I can now create all of the 3D that I need by myself and not have to ask somebody else to help me. Um, and I can get, you know, 90% of the way there in Gravity Sketch, then I bring
Mhm.
it into Blender and I make small tweaks in Blender, and then I bring in surface finishing details, textures, all that, and then can use that as a final part. Like, here's
Oh,
3D
that's a
printed
mule,
shoe. Yep.
right?
From this is with Zellerfeld, and this was done. The final part was built by me. And so you wouldn't necessarily do that like
Mhm.
at a big company, but as an independent idea, it's like I now have that tool. And I think a lot of companies are embracing Gravity Sketch. I think it's still kind of like early adopter
Mhm.
phase. Um, and obviously there's the barrier to entry if you don't have a headset.
Yeah.
Program's free,
Mhm.
but if you don't have a headset, and that can be a challenge for people.
Mhm.
But for me, it's been really good as a way to unlock creation,
Mhm.
and then also asset building.
Yeah. That's true. I mean, in a way, the traditional way is you do something and then you think. This is literally you think as you are doing something. I guess it's really, really helpful along the way. So um, this also flows really well into my next question. Like, what are some new innovations or technologies that you see out there that could further streamline this design manufacturing processes? The Mule one that you did with Zellerfeld is a good
Mm.
example, but do you see others out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges is that this is a partnership, right? You have
Mhm.
a brand or a designer, and then you have the manufacturing partner.
Mhm.
And when you look at someone like Desma, they're very open to questioning and trying new things. And so I think it can be challenging sometimes when you have these processes that are already developed and then you have a partner in,
Yeah.
say, Vietnam. It's like, how do you get them on board with changing the way they're doing things? Because it takes investment from them, right? To buy new machines or to have new training. And it's like, well, what if you guys drop this next season and we've invested all this time and money into it, right? So there's always like change on a scale takes time. And so for me, like my areas of interest around like circularity, single material shoes,
Mhm.
also taking independent ideas, right? So um, I think there's manufacturing processes that are opening new things, materials, more bio-based things, more concern about what happens to the product once you're done with it, right? That
Yep.
not only like, oh, it has recycled content. It's like great, but if it still gets thrown away later, then
Yeah.
that's not going to make the difference, right? So,
Yep.
brands that are trying to get into single material shoes that are performance, like a running shoe, or something more like Crocs, right, where it's a single injection foam, and theoretically it's easy to turn back into product
Mhm.
because it's one material. There's lots of tools like the speed of AI.
Mhm.
I don't think it's coming for my job tomorrow.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot of like weaknesses to it, but it's one of those tools where it's like I've been using AI as a way to ideate
Mhm.
faster or broader,
Sure.
and then taking that as an inspiration for something. So it's still like that human touch, but it's like, okay, like here's a new tool. You can fight it or you can learn how to use it
Yeah.
in your process. And you don't have to use every tool, right? But like, for example, Kedar, he has created a workflow of like Midjourney or DALL-E all the way to like 3D printing the shoe, right? So it's like and they used Hyperganic as well for that process of creating a 3D part from it. So it's like, yeah, I think there's lots of tools that are allowing people to question the status quo.
Yeah.
and find faster approaches. Because again, it's like when you speed up the tools, it probably lets you solve longer or go through more iterations. Doesn't necessarily like the creation time
Yeah.
still needs to be there, right? The back and forth still needs to be there, but how quickly you can get to something valid, I think, is a big part of it. And then, yeah, just like how do you get more independent, interesting ideas to market, and not have to mitigate risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Gotcha. One thing we do at Hyperganic when we are evaluating, consumer goods, besides the fact that, oh, okay, maybe the demand might be questionable if we were to launch something independently. But the other aspect is sustainability. Do people really need another pair of shoe? Out of what material? Where is it gonna end up at? So
yeah.
I'm wondering, from your perspective of doing a bit of both sides, right? Independent development and design versus development and design for a really, really big shoe manufacturer. How do you feel about sustainability? Does it go into your actual considerations in the design process?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the moral quandaries that I have as a designer, right? Because I'm just making junk, right? Like more stuff, right? Like but like as humans, we want to create things. At least for me, like creation is what a lot of my hobbies are. I
Mhm.
do this for fun when I'm not working, right? Um, One of the things I guess one of the ways I rationalize it on my day job is that sport brings value to people's lives. Um, Health, wellness, community, enjoyment, like that comes from sport. And yes, you can go for a hike in flip-flops, or you can play football barefoot. But those experiences are not necessarily enjoyable.
Yeah,
Um, and so specialized footwear, athletic performance footwear unlocks experiences for people. So yes, it is going to end up in a landfill eventually, but we are pushing to ask questions of like, okay, like how do we improve? Because like durability is an aspect of sustainability. If the
yeah,
product lasts longer, that is better, right?
yeah,
It's not just, oh, it's recycled content or
yeah,
it gets, there's different aspects to sustainability.
for
Like,
sure.
oh, like it doesn't have any petroleum in it,
Hmm.
and the water use is low. Like there's
Hmm.
so there are lots of things that we consider. A lot comes from materials side, but it is something that I care about. It's harder to plug in into this old machine, right? I think
Yeah.
that's the struggle. And so where I have the freedom on my own,
Hmm.
I am focused on like a 3D printed shoe is one material.
Hmm.
And with a partner like Zellerfeld, you can mail the product back to them
Hmm.
where they'll shred it and turn it into new product. So um, it's still like a plastic based shoe, but it's starting to rethink the life cycle of the product, right? There's things you have control over and things you don't have control over. And in the space where I can influence it and make my choices about how I do it, it's like, okay, maybe I want to focus on 3D printed, for
Hmm.
example, um, or single material, um, because that is a more attainable circular thing. Um,
Gotcha.
so yeah, I
Nice.
care about it, and try and make decisions where I have the power to influence
Thank
it.
you. Yeah. Yeah, I think everyone who will wear your creation can thank you for that. Not only for thinking about the future, but also thinking about the experiences that you will create for them and you will unlock for them. Penultimate question: what are you looking forward to it the most in the next couple of months? Yeah.
Um, well, we have Women's World Cup coming this
Mhm.
summer,
Yeah.
and boots that I worked on will be in that World Cup, uh,
No way.
which will be super fun.
Okay.
Um, And then, I'm continuing to partner with Zellerfeld, working
Mhm.
on a second design that's taking one of my more successful Instagram concepts and bringing it to life through 3D. So hopefully can also make that available for the people that want it.
That's
And
fantastic. Yeah. We'll
if
drop the
if
link when it's available down there.
yeah,
Yeah. And finally, how can people reach out to you if they like to collaborate or just, speak to you?
yeah, I'm sliding my DMs on Instagram. I'll probably reply unless it gets
Okay,
buried or something. I post on LinkedIn. People can message me there. Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn or Instagram. Yeah.
that's perfect. All right. Our time is up, and thanks so much for your presence here, Daniel.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, bye.
Bye.